Ben Shapiro said that Australia's gun buyback program didn't work. What's Ben Shapiro doing talking about a late 1990s Australian gun buyback program?
Business owner, educator, and lifelong observer of politics and economics, making sense of complex issues.
Well, he was asked about the Second Amendment. He was asked what are his thoughts on it. And he went on to say he was very pro Second Amendment and he totally supports it. He also supports that there should be controls and limits and all those things. He said all the right things, except the bit about the Australian buyback program being a failure, because that really sort of stuck with me. I'm listening to the podcast, I'm listening to Ben Shapiro, I try to listen widely, and he said that, and he, to his credit, he said, I think, and there I'll correct him on his thought, but he did say, and I'll paraphrase, but it's close to quoting. He said, I think the Australian buyback program was a failure. They only got back a third of the weapons. And that was what he said. And I thought, wow, that seems strange, because I remember it being a huge success. I remember the controversy. It was, people were up in arms about it. People were very angry. And I have family members that are farmers, and they were concerned. The farmers were concerned. Sports shooters were concerned. Everyone who had an interest in having a firearm was concerned. Most of the general population wasn't concerned in that sense. But unlike America, this is a very different scenario when you talk to Americans. Even those that are not interested in weapons at all are still very much pro the right to have them. But that aside, just this idea that buyback programs don't work was really interesting to me. So I had a quick look into it to refresh my memory and to get to the end of the video quickly. He was wrong. So what happened was, in Australia, after the Port Arthur Massacre, which was one of Australia's worst mass shooting events, the right-wing government at the time said, let's get rid of privately owned weapons. Let's get them off the street. And the whole country kind of went, yeah, okay. But there was obviously the farmers and the other people had a vested interest, and some sort of libertarian view people that didn't want to do that. But generally there was support for it. So they negotiated and they worked it out, and they came to a program that they thought would help reduce weapons. And I can't tell you exactly the numbers, but off the top of my head, I do remember that they actually ended up getting more of a particular type of weapon than they expected. So their result exceeded their expectations, and I would call that a success. But let's look at Ben Shapiro's number, the 1/3. So what he failed to do here, or what I would conspiratorially call a talking point, what he's done, and you can use this for immigration, you can use this for crime, you can use this for gun buyback programs. When you compare the whole number of weapons, whatever country it's in, but we're dealing with Australia, let's look at that. The whole number of weapons in Australia, and then you look at the whole number of weapons that resulted in the buyback program, yeah, it was a third. That tracks. Of all the weapons in Australia and all the weapons they got back, they got 30% of weapons out of the community. Ben Shapiro and people that want to use that as a talking point are going to call that a failure. Whereas I remember being there and going through that time and hearing what a great success it was. So where's the disconnect? So the Australian side is that they were 85 conservative, 85 to a more positive, 100% successful in their gun buyback program because they got all the weapons they wanted. Remember when I talked about negotiations and farmers and sports shooters and other people with interests that would allow them to have their weapons? Well, guess what? They did get to keep them. And when you say that it was only a third, you're counting all the weapons that people were allowed to keep to show that a gun buyback program doesn't mean the government's coming in to take all your weapons away from you. What the Australian program did was set a target to get specific weapons off the street, out of houses, away from people where they could be stolen, lost, misused, whatever. And they were more than successful, as they said in some cases, regarding some particular types of high-powered weapons, I think it was. And so the farmers, they got to keep their weapons. The sports shooters, they got to keep their weapons. All people that were wanted or required, needed, should have weapons got to keep them. And that's why 2/3 of the number of weapons in the community stayed in the community. And what was reduced was 100% of the unnecessary ones. The 100% of ones that could be used, misused, stolen, or lost. And in that sense, any right-minded person is going to say that was a huge success. Now, there were some other successes down the line that nobody talks about. And I remember this, and I haven't checked this, but it's a memory thing. I remember there being a statistic that came out later. Years later, it came out that male suicide, which was, I think the highest number was in my age range, was reduced by 70% with no explanation other than that was post the gun buyback program. That they were able to reduce that number without doing anything, without bringing in anything, without adding any programs, initiatives, funding, counseling, and whatever, that number just reduced of its own accord. Now, I would be adventurous and extrapolate that to other societies where we know that because of these things there, they are being misused. It's not the farmers, it's not the sports shooters, it's all these weapons lying around in drawers and in cabinets and accessible, lost, stolen, all these things. Which is why I don't talk about this much. That add to the fact that when you look at who's using weapons, it's very easy to say, oh, controls won't do anything about this because look who's using them. It's okay, look who's using them. Criminals. They shouldn't have them. It doesn't mean the laws don't work. It means that they're being lost and stolen and misused because they're there. You have them there for no other reason, really, excluding the farmers and so forth, for no other reason than you want to protect yourself. Why do you want to protect yourself? Because they're there. If you remove them from the equation, you won't need them to protect yourself. And this is something I'm not even going to engage with pro Second Amendment people about, because it's something that is so ingrained in them as opposed to the rest of the world, that this is such a necessary thing. And it's hard to explain that you feel it's so necessary because they're so ubiquitous. And that what was the recent this was another Ben Shapiro statement. That's right. Okay, this is another Ben Shapiro statement, which I won't even attempt to talk about. I'll just relay it here to you. He said that in the events of Israel a couple of years ago, where they were attacked, I think it was July 7th, July 6th, sorry if I've got the date wrong there, but that time when all those hostages were taken and Israel was attacked, he said that if they had a Second Amendment, that might not have been the outcome that it had been. And I almost felt sick to my stomach to hear that, because that's the argument that says teachers should be armed. Why should teachers be armed? Because parents are leaving these things lying around their houses for their kids to pick up and bring to school. So therefore, teachers should be armed. That's not going to produce a whole host of problems either, is it? But this idea that you need to be armed to defend yourself, I would love to hear from anybody if that's ever worked. And I know there are statistics for it that show that it does work on occasion. But I'd like to trade that off with the cost. But as someone famously said, no cost is too high, right? Well, I imagine that if those festival goers had all been armed, yeah, that might have been a different outcome. Sure. I think that when you talk about settlers in Israel being armed, which they often are, they've expanded that there. If anybody didn't know that, they are allowed to be more armed than they used to be. It's necessary when you're doing that sort of activity. For general Israelis on a day-to-day basis, I think if you were to have something like a Second Amendment and you were to encourage everyone to be armed, I think it would be, the cost would be too high for me. And I think that's where I stand on that. This is Lang Standard.
If you're still here, honestly, you have no idea how much it helps if you subscribe. I'll keep these coming.